What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Larry Rifkin and John Krofzik, and John is dressed in his fatigues, wearing his Che Guevara military-style outfit.
Wow. Is that a designer outfit?
Fashionable these days in America. Didn't you hang out with Fidel Castro in the bush when he overthrew Batista back in the 50s? Wasn't that you? No.
Oh, yeah, no.
Didn't you hang out with those guys?
Yeah, I was over there in the Bay of Pigs.
Oh, you were going to take it all back. Well, I thought those guerrillas just didn't pay benefits, so you quit the revolution. I don't know. Do you remember that movie, Bananas, with Woody Allen?
Yes.
You remember that?
Oh, my God, that was long ago.
And I used to play that clip, remember?
Yes.
About the new dictator. And he would say, I've taken over the island. No, why am I sounding like a Jamaican? I don't know.
Yaman.
But they took over the island. He said, now everyone under 16 is now 16. And underwear will be worn on the outside and be checked twice a day. I mean, all these crazy things that Woody Allen said, you know, anybody given their way to take over power in these countries, they might start out as revolutionaries and talk about the people, and they all end up being the same kind of dictator, right?
Right.
Well, there are a lot of people today in America, we are told by studies, who are really intrigued with the notion of socialism.
Yeah, this scares me.
Well, a lot of young people, a lot of millennials are flirting with socialism, but I think they mean it in a different way. And let me be clear about this. I remember the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, who said, now he was a labor leader. I mean, the party's labor and conservative in Britain. And he said that while he rejected what he called socialism, he did buy into the notion of social-ism. Now, do you get the difference?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, the difference is that he didn't really want the government to control all means of production, but he wanted us all to recognize that there are a lot of things that we hold in common and things we have to do together because there aren't markets to do it. And I think whether you're a conservative or you're in the Labour Party in Britain, nobody questions today, after many years of having it, the National Health Service. They believe that health is not one of those things you can put on the block and you can market it, because it just doesn't work in that way, because everybody goes for care, whether they're paying or they're not. So we're all in that part of it together. So that's what he meant by social-ism.
I agree with that. Yes.
So is that what Bernie Sanders really was trying to get across?
Well, I don't know. He was giving away free stuff. I mean, free education. I mean, but the part that always gets
me
is,
didn't say, let's take apart all the companies and corporations and put them in the government's hands.
But ultimately is somebody has to pay for it.
Right.
You know, free stuff. Free stuff
Absolutely.
costs.
But do we even recognize that today in a system that we are told is one of the most pure of all the capitalist systems? Because there are a lot of people getting Social Security or Medicare, and we may have paid $150,000 in our lifetimes into it, and we're taking out $1 million, but we don't think of ourselves as taking anything out of the system.
But we are, and supposedly there was going to be enough workers that, we paid for the people before us, and then they paid for people before us, and unfortunately, it hasn't worked that way.
Well, these young people who did look to Bernie Sanders when he said college should be free and some of these other things, I mean, I think they were thinking more of the Tony Blair type social-ism, free stuff from the government and more social solidarity than they were about turning the entire political economy over to the government.
I don't think they really know what socialism or communism or anything. I think we're so far separated now from from that line of thought that socialism is something different to them.
Okay, but why? Is it because we don't have our natural nemesis, the old Soviet Union? Why is it that they...
Well, I don't know whether we don't teach it in schools. I don't know.
Or is it because there's a communist country that we see as an active trading partner, meaning China, that has a very vibrant capitalist-like economy?
Yeah,
so even communism today is losing its way.
Right. It isn't the way that when our grandparents came over and fled, it at least on the surface seems like a good way to do it.
So are you thinking that not only do our young people not understand what the old role or the old meaning of socialism and communism was, but they also don't, in my mind, and I'm wondering if you agree with this, they really don't even know what a good functioning capitalist system looks like.
You're absolutely right. They don't understand how this republic is supposed to function, and so.
Well, they've been born only in a period when we've had a lot of economic disruption,
a lot of lows, a lot of job loss. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Wage stagnation.
Yeah.
So they haven't looked upon it as the great engine that we saw.
Right.
And they came into this at a time when a lot of those gains had been made, and now they're beginning to slip away a little bit.
And they also see that we're running up the bank account for them to pay for. So, it's really a tough time for them, I think.
So how can they really be part of the American dream? And what is the American dream? And is it now out of the reach of more and more young people in their minds with all the debt that they're laden with? I think the other thing, though, is that they love the fruits of capitalism. They just never think of it in that way. I mean, they love the technology products.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Right? They love the entertainment industry, which is all a part of the mix.
Right.
The fashion competition, the Ubers. They love all this stuff, which comes out of innovation and capitalism.
Right.
They do, but I don't think they think of it in those terms.
No, I think you're right. I think, like I said, the socialism and communism terms have really been watered down to look good.
Well, we're going to talk about the psychological effects of all of this and the way that young people are processing a lot of this about the economic systems across the world and why they might be embracing these fanciful, romantic notions, even if they don't quite understand them. And to help us along here on America Trends is Dr. John Huber. Now, John Huber has been with us before.
Yes, he has.
We've always enjoyed our conversations.
And we could use his help.
Absolutely. And we made this conversation more expansive than simply talking about socialism and capitalism. We really talked about some of the other impacts on our millennials. So I think it's a conversation that you'll want to hear. Dr. John Huber is joining us once again here on AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. He is the chairman for Mainstream Mental Health, a nonprofit organization that brings lasting and positive change to the lives of individuals that suffer from mental health issues. And he also looks at a whole range of issues that he is willing to comment on, and that's why we've got him on the podcast today. And you want to talk about this shocking new poll that reveals that a majority of American millennials prefer socialism over capitalism. How did that come to your attention?
Well, it's interesting because teaching at the university and stuff, this is something that I've been seeing from my students in general. And then I see this article, and it kind of supports what I've been hearing from my students. But the funny thing is, when I ask my students to define capitalism, socialism, liberalism, conservative, they have no idea. They don't know the definitions.
So is it that we're just not doing a good job at explaining and transferring one of the key tenets of our liberal democracy, which is capitalism?
And democracy and what a representative republic is. In fact, last year, 95% of my students could not tell me we were a representative republic. They all said, no, we're a democracy.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So they couldn't even define the government nor the economic system, and yet they benefit so much by it. They love Apple. They love Facebook.
Right.
They love all of these
That's right.
Wonderful technological advances. Having said that, we do such a poor job, both in personal finance and perhaps in macroeconomics today. Why are we so removed from explaining the benefits of our system?
Well, I think part of it is that our public education system is slowly degrading itself and teaching kids what they need to pass a test so they can go to the school districts can go to the homeowners and the taxpayers and ask for more money. Look how good our kids are doing. They're passing these tests higher than ever before, but they're not learning essential things. I mean, they don't even know what a checkbook looks like, let alone a balance sheet. So trying to get them to balance their debit card is nearly impossible these days.
Well, I'm wondering, when I grew up, as much turmoil as there was in the 1960s, many of us questioned a lot of things about our society, but we didn't question the underlying value of our economic system. Is it that there's been so much dislocation, and in their own families they've seen a father or mother thrown out of work or having to replace that one good job with benefits with two that don't have it? Is some of that at play here as you see it?
Well, I think there is definitely disenchantment. I mean, if we go back even as recent as the 1980s, the early 1980s, 85% of our homes at that point were single income. So only about 15% had dual income. And today it's totally reversed, where there's only about 15% that are single income and 85% dual income just to keep the bills paid, not even really to get ahead. So I can see the disenchantment, definitely.
And when we see the flat wages, and we see, again, all that capitalism does, which is whenever there's a major sea change, it is reflected in that economic structure. And so today, with automation and with all of the advances that we benefit from, along with that comes a certain amount of concern, nervousness, and displacement.
And that is a natural part of it. And as those pressures take place in a purely capitalist society, not the crony capitalism, whatever that we call it now, the market shifts and the education shifts, and colleges start supposedly changing to new avenues that are available to our young people to be employed with. And we're not even seeing that right now. The delay is way too long.
It's interesting. I went to a course recently, and the gentleman was talking about the educational system and the way that we looked at it in the past, working together for a factory job of the future, and the way we kind of churn kids out, and we made it a very one-size-fits-all. And it's very different today, and yet we have not reflected that in our educational system.
No, and when we find good teachers and educators who are doing that, it's funny how they just get squashed by the system, and they end up moving out, and a lot of them go into business, and there's a lot of business coaches and instructors for corporations now that I've run into that were great teachers trying to change that system, and they get pushed out.
Now, in terms of the majority of American millennials preferring socialism, is it the Bernie Sanders version of socialism, meaning that there are policies that are for the social good, but they're not unlike perhaps what an FDR might have been proposing? I mean, he's not looking at a toppling of this and calling it socialism in the form of Cuba or some of these other countries. Do they understand what it is? Is it the Sanders-like socialism?
Well, again, I don't know if they have a clear understanding of that. And, the difference between socialism in the Netherlands and Venezuela is I think it misses a lot of our students. But I think it is the Bernie Sanders socialism that is winning them over, honestly.
So that's free stuff. But, the interesting thing about that is that we all get so much free stuff, and yet some of us acknowledge it and some don't. For example, I'm now on Medicare, Dr. Huber. I don't know if you would imagine that. But
I'm not quite there myself, but I'm getting the notices in the mail.
But the point is that when people say to me, well, I put in, I paid, and I say, well, over your lifetime, what do you think you put in? and if they say 150,000, let's use that, and I say, well, if you have one terrible bout with cancer, what do you think you're going to be taking out of the system? And it's probably going to be 500,000 to $1 million for the care.
Yeah, I would say $1 million.
Yeah. So, I mean, yet they don't think they're on the receiving end of benefit.
Right.
But the millennials, they just want, well, go on. What were you going to say?
Well, and that is a completely perfect example. And then we compare it to Social Security, where they want to cut people who put in. And, we can do some really cool things with Social Security because we know how much everybody puts in. And, for example, they could get a statement every month when they get their check electronically deposited. And when their money stops, the statement starts putting it in red. That's how much the government's actually giving you. We're not taking it away from you. We're going to continue the benefits. But now this is money that you didn't put in. And I think that would shock a lot of Americans if they got that statement.
Absolutely. Speaking of being shocked, I've got to tell you that when I also read that in this report that you're referring to, 14% of the millennials here in the U.S. prefer fascism or communism. I mean, have we not labeled those things adequately enough so they know that fascism, represented by Mussolini, Hitler, that these are the things that we defeated, that their grandparents worked against in World War II, or communism, and the 65 million people, I think it is, that were killed in the last century in the name of communism?
They don't understand that, but they know those are hurtful words to America in general because we fought and stood against it. So there's a lot of emotionality behind that, and I think that compounds the situation. Not only do they not understand the actual definitions of them, but they start getting that emotionality in there, and we've even traced it with MRIs, functional MRIs. We've seen that your brain changes blood flow when you get involved emotionally from your higher executive functioning areas to your limbic system where all your emotions are. So it makes your executive functions no longer work. So even if we try to explain it to them, once they get that emotion going, they're not going to understand it.
And is this becoming an emotional issue? I know that in other countries, we've already begun to see where young people voting in greater numbers have replaced more conservative governments in Canada and close in Britain, where Jeremy Corbyn did much better than people thought. And the best I could tell, it was because of a lot of young people coming out. And even though he was thought of as kind of way out on the left and a bit cranky, a lot of young people said he's a better choice than Ms. May, who is still in, but just by a thread. So is this a trend that we are likely to see more of coming in 2018 and 2020 in America?
I think so. I think, just the young turnout that we had in the last three elections was astounding. I mean, when I was 18 and, we weren't even, they didn't even consider us, it was just like, oh yeah, y'all go vote, practice, do whatever you're going to do. We're going to go talk to middle-aged and the elderly and get them to vote for us. And it's kind of scary.
Well, millennials now, I think they actually outnumber as we're dying off the baby boomers, and they're a huge cohort to be reckoned with. Many of them are organizing today politically, too, and I would imagine most on the left, if not the socialist left, the very progressive left. Well, let me ask you about them as well. We're talking about millennials today on America Trends, and we should, because they're about to inherit the body politic. Facebook is so important to many of them and to older folks as well. And the fact that it is addictive because it exploits a vulnerability in people's brains, and that's why we have you here. You can explain this to us. But this was just referenced by one of the founders of Facebook. So tell us what they knew about us that is having such an impact on the lives of young and old.
Okay, well, let's think about you. You're at work and you're going to go down to the break room, and you get up from your desk and you walk down the hall, and you pass a friend coming the other way, and you see them at the end of the hall. They smile and they wave at you. You immediately get a dopamine load from your brain, and you feel better in that instance, and you smile back, and wave at them, and you get that reciprocity, and you both feel good. And you can stop for a second, see how the wife and kids are. You can shake hands. You can talk about, salaries, rate, whatever. And then you go on and get your snack. Well, what they've done with that little like button on Facebook is they've given you that same dopamine burst, but there's none of the other stuff around. So essentially what you've done is you're taking and drinking in the saccharin sweet, and it feels good, but there's no nutrition behind it. And the only way to get that feeling again is to reciprocate. You like somebody else, they like your page, then you go and find something on their wall and like that. They get the same rush. They come back to your page. They find another item to like. And all of a sudden, just like the article says, they have now occupied your time, and they have distracted you and drawn your attention away from worthwhile things, and they can sit there and run their little ads and pop-ups, and now you go, hey, that would be a good idea. I'll go buy that. And they've got control of you.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, are you saying to me that of my hundreds of friends on Facebook, that if I put up a notice saying, I'm in great distress right now, will someone come over and help me, that I'm going to get them clicking into a like button, but nobody's come into my house to rescue me? I should try that.
That is unfortunate. Well, I wouldn't do that. An example of that is my daughter came in 3 nights ago, and she was crying. One of her friends on one of the social medias was telling her that she was going to end her life. And my 12-year-old daughter comes to me because I'm a psychologist. And there's actually mechanisms, for example, in Snapchat, you can go in and send a message to the administration, and all of a sudden they're following up and they're getting a hold of that person.
Well, in truth, I just took one of these mental health first aid programs for a day because I wanted to understand more about it. There are many people in my community who are in distress, and I want to be able to recognize it. And that's one of the things that they told us, is that if somebody really is in despair, or they tell you that they're thinking of ending their lives, take it seriously.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, let's get back to Sean Parker, and this is one of the co-founders of Facebook. Mm-hmm. So they're exploiting a vulnerability in our brains. And so when we think about this, I mean, I know we've all seen these old 1950s B movies where somebody kind of gets into your brain and takes it over and has you doing these malevolent things. I mean, how nefarious has this gotten? And do you look upon Facebook as a psychologist as on balance positive or negative in the lives of so many who are dependent upon it these days?
Well, I think it's like anything else. In moderation, there's a lot of stuff in this world that is amazing. In excess, there's a lot of stuff that can be very harmful. And if we look at social media in general, the research shows that if you have 7 or more social media platforms that you use, you're 3 times more likely to be clinically depressed than the general population. If you have 3 or fewer social media platforms, say Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat, the odds are that it's actually benefiting your life and making your life better. It's when you get into that extra and it starts becoming overwhelming for you to meet all the demands. A lot of people are having job performance issues because they have to go back and check because of that feedback system that we're talking about from Sean Parker, and they're losing jobs. They're not creating relationships. That's a big thing for our millennials. A good thing is we're having fewer unwanted pregnancies and fewer sexually transmitted infections in these younger crowds. But when it comes time for them to date, they're going to apps like Tinder, and they don't know how to actually engage in long-term relationship communication.
So as we look at the millennials today and what they are replacing real tactile relationships with, I mean, how artificial are these interactions that are going on online? How much should we depend upon them as taking the place of that contact or that constant socializing with friends and neighbors?
Well, it's taking place in a lot of it. In fact, I went to do an evaluation at a high school, a high school student, and parents were concerned with mental health issues, not just academic and intelligence stuff. So I go in to see the kid in his natural environment. At the high school, I walk into the cafeteria, and I never recall a high school cafeteria being quiet. And I wouldn't say this was exactly quiet, but it was nothing like what we grew up in the cafeteria, as far as the chatter and stuff. And so I sat down next to the guy, and he was friendly. And I said, "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to my friends." And these guys are all sitting around him, but they're staring at their phones. And he shows me he's texting them all, and they're right there on the same table.
So when we look at this, is the danger that when you're online and you're getting perhaps false feedback that may be positive or negative, or is it that you're looking at these other lives that are being constructed online to look as if they are just so pleasurable, so full, so round, that you feel your life in comparison has no value? I mean, what is the great danger of some of this interactivity, but only via the online?
Well, you just said it. People are portraying their life as being perfect, and you start comparing yours against that perfect life. And you don't know about the bills they have and maybe the problem they're having in their marriage and what's going on with their kids and maybe an illness. You just see the perfect side of that coin. And you start beating yourself up, and you start having issues within your own life because you're trying to reach the unattainable. And it sets levels too high, goals too high for the average person in a lot of ways. On top of that, when you're trying to make those relationships, because you've been this superficial person and you haven't had practice, you haven't gone on all these dates and had failures and made a fool of yourself at different times and had to learn to recover from that. I mean, simple things like eye contact is difficult for a lot of young people today to meet. And in fact, I'm concerned about it. My kids are not allowed to use their electronics unless they pay for it, and they pay for it through physical activity and group engagement. So, for example, my son's a second-degree black belt because it's like you want to get on the computer and play games with some of your friends. You need to go give me some time. Go to the gym, work out. And my daughter, she plays basketball, and that's how she pays for her time. And then we do other things that keep them from putting their hands on their phone. I take them fishing. Deer season's open, and my son got his first deer last year. And the minute I say, let's go to the ranch, they drop everything, and they're ready before I am because, like my son said the first time I took him out shooting skeet, the clay pigeons, was, "Man, Dad, this is just so real. You just can't explain it," because he'd only done everything on computer.
As a psychologist and as a parent, what are you most concerned about? We've read a lot of things, and I'm not certain how many are true, about these problems with kids really not being able to interact. And yet, on the other hand, we hear that those who are in the work environment like to be collaborative, much more social and engaged, working in groups. So I'm trying to figure out this dissonance between this isolation and their social media and yet their desire for engagement in the workplace. Tell me what's really going on out there, because I'm confused.
Well, it really depends on which study you look at and what time, and you have to start looking at all the variables. But what I see anecdotally, is like I said, I force my kids to do these types of things. Now when they go online, they've got their phone going and they're playing these online games, but they've got a group chat going on Skype, and they're all talking with each other, and they're actually now interacting with each other. They're just not playing on the video game. They're actually maybe all playing in the same game or same arena, but now there's 5 or 6 people doing this group chat, and it sounds like there's a tribe of people in their room. And so, we started shutting the door because there was too much noise, and now they use headsets and things like that, so that we can leave the door open. That way we can visually watch what they're getting into on the computers and stuff. So I think that model in the workplace is, as our kids evolve in their sophistication, they're coming up with that same kind of model in their groups at school and activities like that, whether it's online gaming and such.
Well, we hope that a lot of this translates into really positive abilities and capabilities, that they translate into more social interaction. At the same time, and in closing, in terms of our conversation today, I want to ask you, because a lot of these young people are growing up, and they are seeing almost on a weekly basis that there is a shooting, a mass shooting in America. And I'm wondering, what impact is that having on the psyche of young people? And mind you, when I grew up, I saw assassinations of major political figures like Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and of course President Kennedy. So we've all grown up with a lot of national trauma. But what impact is this having on them?
Well, I think one of the things that it's having on an impact on is that all of a sudden it's almost like this is now a viable answer to whatever ails you. And that's a message I don't want these kids getting. But I think as more people do it, we're seeing that, hey, if he did it, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea in the first place. And unless they've experienced some of the trauma and troubles associated with that, for example, the shooting at Sutherland Springs, I work at a hospital that's not very far from there, and I know several people who had friends who were wounded or expired in that shooting, and you see the passion and you see the loss, and unfortunately, I think it's all too common. And the kids, when they're upset, they look at that person as, they did something, maybe I'll make somebody else pay too.
But somebody who is very vulnerable. And we had that in Connecticut during the Newtown shootings when we learned more about the shooter. And there are a lot of kids out there who are vulnerable. They're growing up often, without benefit of both parents, or in a situation where there's been trauma. And when they see this, and we see in a sense, and tell me if I'm wrong, that some of these people are trying to one-up the last shooter and, seeing how high they can make the stakes. I mean, is this now a new form of competition among those who are so bothered and troubled in their own existence?
I think there is an element of that. I wish I could say, no, it's not, because that's such a scary preposition and thought. But I think that is out there, and that is an underlying thing. They want to leave some kind of legacy, even if it is bad.
We'll return to this episode of America Trends in just a moment. If you like what we're doing here at America Trends Podcast, please don't keep it to yourself. I know there are a lot of people, John, who think, well, if I'm listening and somebody else wants to listen at the same time, maybe we're going to collide and they're not going to be able to hear us. Yeah. Is that the way the technology works?
No, there's plenty of bandwidth. Everybody can listen at the same time.
All right. Well, that dispels that myth. Now, you can do a number of things that would really be helpful to us. You could give us a kind rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, and that boosts what they consider to be our value and visibility. And what does that do, John?
Well, that puts us in the forefront, so that you can find us easier, and most important is other people can find us easier.
And you can subscribe there or on our site, americatrendspodcast.com, or wherever you're listening, so we can alert you to new episodes of the podcast, which, by the way, we put out twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And stay in touch with us on both Facebook and Twitter at Trends Podcast. Or you can like us on Facebook or follow us where, John?
On Twitter.
On Twitter, that's right, where the world turns to hear fake news or whatever it is. Well, you can direct message us at Trends Podcast or using hashtag Trends Podcast. And John, with our growing audience, and really it's been pretty remarkable, a lot of people just came to us the last month or two, and they might have missed earlier episodes. Can they get them again?
They can look through them and pick the ones they want to listen to. They're all on the website, and a lot of them are up on iTunes, many of them.
All right. Well, listen, there's lots of material to listen to. We hope you have the time, and we'll lend it to us because we try to make it worth your while. And thanks so much for listening.
And tell your friends.
We now return to this episode of America Trends. Do you think that these mass shooters share some common characteristics as a psychologist? And if so, what are they? And is there any way to isolate for them to get some help or some treatment before any of these tragic events occur?
Well, I think there are some trends. If we're looking at a purely terroristic type of thing, if I were to evaluate them using a battery of psychological tools, the unfortunate thing is they would look pretty normal, like I'm assuming you and I would look. But when I start asking them, for example, about their political views or their religious views, that's where I would see the evidence, the ideation that is extreme. And unfortunately, the last couple of shooters, I think there were other things involved. You know, we talk about Mandalay Bay and then Sutherland Springs. I think there was a lot of hatred and rage going on, feeling like they'd been harmed and they're going to make people pay. And that's, in a lot of ways, even harder to identify because people know that if I tell somebody I hate somebody and I'm going to harm them, they're going to come after you. But if you start asking me about your views on religion and you are giving them attention, they tend to go off and build, and you can see that within their conversation. Because, like I said, we're trained to hide the hatred and anger and things like that. So, are you talking about personality traits?
Yes.
That are okay. Personality traits.
Yes.
There's actually some predictors for violence, and it's based on past behavior items, difficulty dealing with different situations, in particularly if there's a history of cruelty to animals, if there's a history of fire starting or playing with fire, not necessarily burning houses down, but just being focused on fire. And believe it or not, bedwetting past the developmentally normal age. Those are predictors. But it doesn't mean that if you have those three that you're actually going to do these types of things. But what we see is, for example, the Ted Bundys of the world, they all have those types of things in common.
How concerned are you, in closing, with the trauma that a lot of people experience in their lives, in their young lives? I recently moderated a panel on opioids here in the state in which I live, and the root to all of this, seemingly, if you really go back and look at it, is the fact that a lot of people are medicating because they want to get away from pain that is associated with a lot of experiences. And now a lot is coming to the fore about sexual abuse and violence in the family, neglect, and so forth. As a psychologist, how healthy are we in terms of the mental health of the society and our young people in it?
Well, I think in a lot of ways that's one of the reasons why I started my nonprofit, Mainstream Mental Health, is these things are not being dealt with, these types of pain. They're being treated with a Band-Aid of medication, Xanax or whatever your doctor decides to give you. And I think if we're able to open up and actually talk about our thoughts, our feelings, our fear, our loss, inability to cope, we can start teaching and helping people learn to cope and deal with these struggles. And the more we don't do that, the more troubled our society is going to be when somebody loses it and they don't have the right medication, and there they go. They don't know how to cope, and we're all going to pay for it.
All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for coming by and sharing your thoughts today on a number of different issues related to our millennials and our society and our, psychological well-being. Well, I thank you again, Dr. John Huber, for joining us once again on AmericaTrendsPodcast.com.
If there was only one thing I could add to that whole conversation is that with all of this, there are some amazing young people out there that are they're amazing, they're together, they're with it, and I don't want to negate them. That's the only thing. If we could find some way to incorporate that into that. Other than that, you do always an amazing and professional job. I love when you call me.
Oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate that, and we'll return the compliment. Thank you.